We're also streaming live on YouTube, so head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast. All right, 2024, it's an election year. We all know that. And that means an election is certain to be pivotal catalyst for markets and companies in terms of legislation, regulations, enforcement, and other government actions. Let's put some numbers on that. $25 billion of health-insured revenue. That's at risk as subsidies expire. 5 to 19% potential increase in required capital for large banks. 28% corporate tax rate possible if Democrats sweep. So there are just a million variables out there that will be impacted by this election. So what do? You go to Bloomberg Intelligence. They've got the definitive research report on this election, the two candidates, the two policies, and what it can mean for banks and all types of companies around this country. Nathan Dean joins us here. He's the mastermind of this report. 42 pages it is. Bloomberg Intelligence senior policy analyst. Nathan, I don't know where to start here because you've got the Republican Party and the Democratic Party clearly have different priorities as it relates to economic policy, regulatory policy. Where did you start?
So I think what we did is we started with the report by looking at what are the key sectors to watch, and we really had 5 of them. The first one was investment banks. As you mentioned earlier, if President Biden wins, you could see somewhere between 7 to 10% increase in capital requirements. If President Trump wins, that could be off the table. We looked at electric vehicles. The tax credits for the electric vehicles could be at risk during our tax reform debate next year. Like you mentioned in terms of tax, global manufacturers. President Trump has called for a 15% corporate tax rate. And just a few minutes ago, Representative Steve Scalise said he's going to make the tax cuts for individuals permanent. So tax reform and the impact on manufacturing. And the other two were healthcare to the $25 billion subsidies. That's really for Centene and United Health. And then finally was big tech, because whether you get President Biden or President Trump, more likely than not, you're going to get a very skeptical Washington towards big tech, certainly both in Congress and also in the enforcement side.
Nathan, the question then becomes, what can he, and this has been the question throughout his 4 years also, what can he do on his own, and what would he need a Republican Congress for?
Yeah, so, I think one of the biggest questions we get from clients is, what does the executive order landscape look like if President Trump wins? And I'd say about 90% of the time, an executive order is a fancy way of the president picking up the phone and saying to his staff, I expect you to do X, Y, and Z. But there's a difference there. The difference is for trade, tariffs, and foreign relations, the power of the presidency is a lot more powerful when it comes to that. So when President Trump uses words like nasty, calling the European Union, as he did in this Business Week interview that I recommend everybody read, that's something that investors have to pay attention to. Now, when it comes to tariffs, the president can certainly go out there and say, I want to do this, but then it's going to be up for Congress and the business community and so forth, but potentially try and influence the White House to either get to the appropriate amount or try in some cases stop it from even happening.
So are there certain industries that, I think about the healthcare industry. I'm trying to think about regulated industries, and healthcare is certainly one of them. And you mentioned the subsidies, but do the Republicans and the Democrats think differently about the economics of healthcare?
Yeah, it does. And this is really where the process comes into play, because that subsidies, that $25 billion subsidies is Obamacare subsidies, and that requires an act of Congress. And I think you don't need to be a Washington expert to know that gridlock is going to continue no matter who wins the presidency. So look for subdued actions from Congress when it comes to healthcare. Now, the difference is on the regulatory side. On the regulatory side, and this is where you look at the FDA and a lot of the actions they've been doing, you can bypass Democratic opposition and just implement your own policies, but it takes time. Mm-hmm. And so I would say just general rule of thumb for a lot of the healthcare issues that are going on at the agencies after President Trump, if he wins, were to input his new regulatory leadership, at that point, you probably have another 18-month to 24-month window for any regulatory change. So for the healthcare industry, there's a lot of time to prepare for any changes. You'll know exactly what's going to happen well before it does.
Going back to the EV point, it definitely feels like solar, EVs, stuff like hydrogen from the IRA, like those are the stuff maybe potentially on the chopping block, potentially, with a President Trump win. But then the Musk thing is weird because President Musk, what does that mean? Elon Musk has definitely become a big supporter of President Trump, donating to super PACs. And I'm wondering if that relationship will change the calculus to how President Trump sees electric vehicles.
Absolutely. You hit it right on the head. And we even say this in the report. There's a difference between headline risk and reality. So if you look at the electric vehicles, you can look at statements that President Trump and other Republicans have said, saying they do not like these electric vehicle tax credits out there and so forth. But then you balance it with the Elon Musk, and even taking it to a grander scale on the Inflation Reduction Act, a lot of the benefits of the IRA are going to GOP-led states. So what you have to do here is, A, take the statement, okay, if President Trump says, I want to do away with the electric vehicle tax credit, how am I going to do that? Most likely, I'll do that as part of tax reform and via the reconciliation process, which means I probably won't have any Democrats going aboard with me, so I need all Republicans on board. At that point, if Elon Musk starts whispering, saying, hey, we like these tax credits for the EV world, then that change may not even be a high priority anymore. So I would just say that for a lot of the statements, you have to remember short-term risk versus long-term risk. And as we see with every single election, politicians of both parties love to go out there and say, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. But then when they get into power, it's X, Y, Z minus a whole bunch of other stuff because I'm going to be a little bit more moderate now.
Hey, Nathan, how about for our good friends on Wall Street, M&A bankers and lawyers? Under this administration, the regulator has been pretty tough, and it's been pretty tough to get big M&A deals approved. Presumably, that would be more Wall Street friendly, M&A friendly with a Republican administration?
It really depends on the leadership that President Trump, again, if he were to win, would put in place at the FTC and the DOJ. Because you have one side, you have the Republican business-friendly view, the stereotypical Republican business-friendly view. If you get somebody like Jamie Dimon, and I'm just picking on the banking execs, if you get somebody from Wall Street, like a Gary Cohn individual that was in his last administration, then you could just reasonably say that M&A activity will get a little bit earlier or a little bit easier. But if you get somebody that comes from the economic populist side of the party, for example, Senator Vance, the vice presidential candidate, spoke in favor of the FDIC chairwoman Lyman Khan and said that she was one of Biden's best picks. And so if President Trump comes out and picks an economic populist for the heads of the FTC and the DOJ, M&A may be very difficult for the next few years. It really just depends who's going to get that nod. And that would come right after the election or right after inauguration if President Trump wins.
Now, obviously, what we're seeing in the market today is a steep reaction to tech selling off, but also the news that potentially President Biden administration is looking for other ways to curb foreign technology chips making it into Chinese things. So ASML, Tokyo Electron getting hit. Are these kind of companies in this sector going to be hurt like no matter what? Like either way, both administrations are going to crack down even harder on China. And how do we think about that?
So the answer is at a high level, yes. So the Biden administration has already even put out a proposal on Treasury. The Treasury Department has put out a proposal limiting private equity investments into semiconductors, artificial intelligence, quantum computing in China. So being seen as tough on China is good politics no matter who you are. But the one thing that we're seeing from statements from the White House, but whether it's Trump or Biden, is that there's always chances for flexibility down the line. Because the way this works is that the president goes out and makes a statement, and then it's up to his staff to actually implement it. And as you go through this implementation, you often see instances where the president dials back. Because look, whether it's President Biden or President Trump, they have to look Xi Jinping in the face and say, we're going to do this. So I would just say that, starting it right now, the answer would be yes. No matter who you are as president, it's going to be seen as difficult. But let's look at the geopolitical tensions as we get into 2025, and let's see if the president's stances changes any, because ultimately what we could face with in, say, 2026 could be dramatically different.